Unacademy. Let's crack it.
Hello everyone, this is Piyush. UPSC Civil Services Mains 2023 is going on, and by this time all the GS papers are done. Paper 1, 2, 3, 4, all the papers have been completed. So here I am to discuss about the paper 1, specifically the history segment. Before I start discussing the paper, I would like to go for a brief analysis of the paper, and this time the paper was literally very good. Good in many sense, I must say. The first, good number of questions being asked from history segment, and roughly we can say 33% questions were coming from history. So more or less we can say from history segment the questions of 75 marks have been asked. Well, apart from this, I'm also happy after seeing the questions, because this time after seeing the nature of the questions, we can say that they are coming more or less from the real content of history. Sometimes what happens in general studies, you see some such questions which are having some connections with history, and then they are trying to link it with the other things also. So in that case, it is becoming literally problematic for the students to write the answers. But this time if you'll see the questions, they are purely from the core content of history. And in fact, these questions are also such questions which can be answered only once you have understood the history properly, instead of you have just tried to mug up the content of history. In that case, it's going to be very problematic for you. So I always used to say, even in the class also, when you have to attempt the questions in specifically in mains, now you don't need to only see it in terms of facts. Okay, this is one topic, this is one topic, this is one topic. There are a couple of characters, they are always very important, and I always used to ask you to think while reading history. Such as there was one question on the comparative study of Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, and if you haven't studied it properly, in that case you won't be able to answer these kind of questions. So what I'm trying to suggest to you, that the questions were coming from the topics which were quite expected. In the class itself, I very frequently used to say to the students ki Rabindranath Tagore is very important, and in fact I always used to say that Gandhi, whenever question is going to come from Gandhi, you be ready for the comparative questions. Maybe with Gandhi, the comparison between Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose, maybe the comparison between Gandhi and Ambedkar, maybe the comparison between Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, and you can see the questions is coming from Gandhi, that kind of comparative study. So the questions were there in a very expected line, and in fact the question that has been asked from ancient India, and then one question precisely from medieval India, that's also conveying you this idea, or conveying you this, that you have to prepare not only the modern Indian history, but at the same time you should focus on every aspect of history, either it is ancient or medieval or modern, because now that balance has been it has been tried to make the balance. Because if the questions are coming from let's say ancient, medieval, modern world as well, in that case you need to prepare them well, and how to manage all the segments, that becomes a kind of challenging thing. So this time the questions were undoubtedly from the core content, and that's good for you, because you study history, and then if you have been finding the questions from history not only in the pre-examination but even in the mains examination also, so that's undoubtedly good for you, right? So that somehow conveys this idea that you need to focus on history also if you want to score very good in paper 1 GS, right? So without wasting time, let us discuss, or let's see the questions which are being asked. So the first question, the same question I had been discussing, what was the difference between the Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore in their approach towards education and nationalism? So basically this question is asking you to compare about the approach of Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore towards what? Towards basically the education and nationalism. So when you'll see that their approach towards education and nationalism undoubtedly was very unique. Mahatma Gandhi had a proper view and vision towards the education, and at the same time Rabindranath Tagore is also known for his unique system of education. So both of them have suggested something very unique with respect to education, and that's why it appeared in the question. In the same way, the view of these two fellows with respect to the nationalism was also very different. Instead of believing much into the nationalism, which is a kind of idea, at that point of time it was very much required, because India had been going through Indian War of Independence, and that's the reason because of it was important. But instead of discussing much about this, these people were more into dealing with a kind of idea related to universalism, and that's why this question has been asked. So if you'll write the answer of this question, So of course you need to go for a basic introduction, and in the introductory segment, what exactly you are going to write, you'll be writing that how come these two important personalities are important with respect to many things, specifically with respect to the foundation of this modern, or let's say contemporary India. So if you'll see the present day India, in that case you can find that their contribution, their ideas are very much being followed by us, and that's why these kind of questions or this question is being asked. So if we'll you'll write that their contributions is undoubtedly, or let's say it's unparalleled, and that's why they still remain very important, and in fact we have been following their systems even in the current scenario, right? And then we'll be comparing them one by one. So let us first, education is there, so we'll be writing about the education. So when it comes to Gandhi's idea about the education is mainly coming from the Vardha plan. And Vardha plan, though it was presented by, or this report was prepared by Zakir Hussain committee, but then it was precisely based on certain articles written by Mahatma Gandhi on education, and that's how it is considered to be more or less the idea of Mahatma Gandhi. So that remains the major source for us to know about the Gandhian idea on education. So if you'll see this, in that case you'll find that Gandhi's focus was mainly on basic education, right? So Gandhi never talked about a kind of education of, let's say, higher degrees. Gandhi had a very different view. Gandhi always wanted to keep the things minimal, and in fact he never wanted to take the things to beyond a label. So that's why he was not emphasizing much on the higher education. Rather, what exactly this person was doing, he was talking about the basic education. So he just wanted to make the education as a mean of survival, and this is how he developed a different vision for the education, and he focused on basic education, right? So his philosophy, and apart from this basic education, we can talk about his philosophy is revolving around the vocational and aimed overall the character development, right? So there are two more things that we can talk about. So it's about the education and then vocational and character development. Vocational means that Gandhi always believed that whenever you have been learning something, so that learning should have a practical application. So we are not supposed to learn the things which could not be applied practically, and that's how his emphasis was more on the vocational education. That's one thing. And then of course character development. So you know Gandhi, his personality, and you all should understand one point, that Gandhi always talked about the virtues and then character building, and that's how he believed that education may be one way through which you can literally build the character of the people, and that's how he was talking about these things. So Gandhi's idea was earning while learning. So he always emphasized on this vocational training, and this is how he was talking about, let's say he was giving this slogan, earning while learning. So it can enable the people to earn something, and he believed that at least in a country like India, people should be trained in this kind of forms that could enable them to earn also something, right? Well, and that was the main idea of this, was self-sufficiency. If people have learned such skill, in that case, if learned such skills which could literally enable them to earn something, so that was good for India, and that's why he had been suggesting such kind of thing. So Gandhi's idea was mostly about dealing with these these kind of concepts, and that was precisely, I can say, the central idea of Gandhi's philosophy. So one more thing, that Gandhi was always talking about basically the primary education. I have already discussed with this point, that his emphasis was on the primary education. And why primary, not higher education, that I have already discussed. Morality remains another aspect, and the way Gandhi's idea regarding Sarvodaya is somehow being fulfilled by this thing. And that's how Gandhi had such kind of ideas. But on the other hand, when it comes to Tagore, this person had a different view on education. Now Tagore's vision of education was basically, it could be understood by us through this Shanti Niketan. Now that was, that there was a educational center started by him, and it is known for its uniqueness. It is known for its different vision towards the education. That's the that's the specification of that person. So what kind of ideas he had been discussing? He was always talking about this holistic educational institution, right? This institution was a holistic educational institution that was founded by him, and he always emphasized on what? Creativity, right? So he, through education, wanted to build the creativity among the students. That creativity may be the way of learning, right? Through the creativity, people could people could learn something. That was the idea, and that could have secured the well-rounded individual's development. That was the whole idea. So his approach was basically to help students to develop their physical, right, then emotional, and then intellectual capabilities. So this was the main vision of Tagore's idea, that it wanted to develop the physical, emotional, and intellectual capabilities. So according to Tagore, education should not be limited to the classroom, but it should extend beyond the nature, or let's say natural environment. So he always believed that the things could be learned through practicing, and that's how he never wanted to impart education in a confined or closed room. Rather, he wanted the students to learn the things while doing various kind of activities, and that's how I must say the open environment was very much required. Well, apart from this, there is another very important idea, in Tagore's principle, that was about freedom, securing freedom through this education. That was also one idea. And then another important feature is basically the unity of West and East. So Tagore was giving due respect to the Indian cultural values. At the same time, Tagore was also emphasizing even on the progressive outlook of the Western people. So the Indian philosophy, spiritualism of Indian philosophy, and progressive outlook of the Western Western philosophy, or let's say Western educational system, this is what he wanted to bring in the educational system. And that's how it's a very unique kind of phenomena. And in fact, this is something which is definitely coming up with multiple benefits. That was the whole idea of Tagore. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to Gandhi's and Tagore's idea regarding nationalism, that was also very unique. So when it comes to Gandhi's idea, so he believed basically, first of all, let me tell you that why his idea of nationalism is very important, because he was the person leading the Indian freedom movement. And since he is leading the Indian freedom movement, and he had realized the potential of the mass participation in the movement. The moment someone is talking about the mass participation, I hope it is easy to understand. It is easy to understand that in order to secure the mass participation, the idea or the feeling of nationalism should be there. If people are participating in any movement, so either you talk about non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, or even Quit India movement, so the participation of people was very much required, and that could have been done only once the idea of nationalism is there. Though Gandhi ji was not believing in the idea of narrow nationalism, but in case of Indian freedom movement, he realized the importance of this, and that's how he had been discussing about this idea of nationalism. He never wanted to confine the whole world into a couple of boundaries. Rather, what exactly he had been saying, there should be some smaller units and there should be some universalism. But then his philosophy is a bit different than his, as compared to his practical approach, and that's why he had been discussing about this, about this basically nationalism, right? So he just wanted to, he had been using various tools, as I had been discussing, for his mass movement, that's called as civil disobedience, or let's say, other mass movements, in order to build a unified nation. That's how he just wanted to unite the people. Okay, apart from that, the spiritual imperative, that is also an important phenomena. So he wanted to mix this nationalism with sort of spiritualism. And he always believed that India stands very different from rest of the countries, specifically the Western countries. And that was one way through which he wanted to prove the uniqueness of India. And that's how he was discussing about this spiritual imperatives. Okay. At the same time, Gandhi's attempt to formulate the theory of nationalism on the basis of certain liberal and extremist principles. So sometimes he was mixing both sort of ideas. Some were liberal, some were extremist ideas. So somewhere it seems that he is inspired by the Tilak, somewhere it seems that he is very much inspired by the Gokhale. And that's how his idea would be mixed of these two. And that's how he is coming up with a kind of very strong and very unique idea of nationalism. And that's how he just wanted to build certain values, and through these values he wanted to penetrate the idea of nationalism among the people. So the way he was dealing with the idea of Swaraj, or less enlightenment, self-control, self-development, harmony, tolerance, these are certain virtues or certain values which were there in his nationalism. On the other hand, if it comes to Tagore's idea of nationalism, so I must say it was more close to universalism, right? So he was the person, he also never believed only in the idea of, let's say, nationalism, but he believed that there should be an universalism. And if we'll see, that person or that philosopher, in that case, will find that he was more an internationalist rather than a nationalist only. But still, at that point of time, since it was the Indian freedom movement going on, and that's the reason because of what everybody needed to promote this idea of nationalism, and that's how he was also dealing with sometimes the patriotic arrogance, then the organized selfishness. So these are certain things that he has discussed, and the higher ideas of ideals of humanity. These are some important things what he has discussed in his nationalism. So that's how you're going to compare, by putting them into various categories, and that would be the best way of dealing with this answer. So there are certain keywords that you need to know, that the way I had been using certain keywords, and in fact, if you have literally incorporated these keywords in your answer, I think in that case you can definitely expect a good marks. Moving to the next question. Explain the role of geographical factors towards the development of ancient India. Now, it is a question which is directly based on NCERT. If you'll see the NCERT in first chapter, I guess it's the second chapter of NCERT, the old NCERT I'm talking about, it's dealing with this. In fact, the moment you read history, I must say that whenever you read history, this is one idea which is always there. And in fact, whenever we teach history, we always try to make this idea among the people or among the students. We try to convey this idea among the students. Look, geography does play a very important role. Now, this is a simple concept that you needed to convey to the evaluator in a very organized manner with some very good examples. That is the main idea of this question. So basically, this question is about the role of geographical factors towards the development of ancient India. So how come in ancient India, geographical factors have played very important role? So there are n number of such examples that we could have used in order to convey our idea. So you could have written the ancient Indian history is not a stagnant one, rather there are so many developments that could be noticed, and it starts from prehistory and it goes up to, let's say, Gupta period. So there are several changes that could be noticed, and these changes, whatever the changes that we have been discussing, there are various factors which were responsible for these changes. But among these changes, the geographical factors cannot be ignored, because to a greater extent, they were shaping the direction of the development of human societies in India. So you can start it from any period, or you can get the examples from different periods, and that's how you can write it. So such as when you have been writing this answer, you could have written by putting some examples, such as the moment it comes to the decline of Harappan civilization, right? So in the process of this decline, we always talk about certain geographical factors which have played very significant role. Though we are not pretty sure about that, but still more or less we talk about the geographical phenomena which remain responsible for it. Apart from this, we can also understand it as a process. What is that process? When you start from the Vedic period and you go up to, let's say, Gupta period, a constant movement can be noticed from the west to the east. And the moment they are moving towards the east, you can find that there are certain developments which are happening. When you talk about the Vedic culture in the western side, it remained precisely a rural culture, and in fact agriculturist culture. Agriculturist society. In early Vedic period, it was more pastoralist. They are coming to, let's say, upper Gangetic plains, and they become agriculturist community. They move to the middle and lower Gangetic plains, and that's how they convert not only into a purely agriculturist community. At the same time, somehow they managed to create great amount of surplus, and with the help of the surplus, ultimately they were capable of establishing urbanization, and then certain, to some extent, it is also said by, that they were capable of, let's say, establishing the state in a true sense. So that could be also connected with the geographical development. When it comes to the second urbanization, let's say, which happened in the Mahajanpada period, or let's say the state formation, these kind of things were not possible until and unless the circumstances would have allowed for them. And the circumstances allowed to them when they have created surplus, their economy became very diverse, and in fact, it became a very prosperous economy. And in order to control this diverse economy, the prosperous economy, then the flourished agriculture, they needed authority also, and that's how state is coming into existence. So that's also depending on the formation of state, the urbanization, all these greater developments were somehow depending on what? The geographical factors. So I'm not saying solely they are deciding the direction, let's say growth, or let's say the development, but then they are definitely playing very important role. And another prominent example that could have been used here, and that's about basically the Sangam history. If we'll see the Sangam history, the first thing that we discuss in the Sangam history is basically the Tinai concept. And what is this Tinai concept? That's the concept of eco-zone. And whatever we understand for the Sangam society, we understand it with respect to what? With respect to the Tinais. So there are different Tinais such as Mulai, Palai, Marutam, Kurenji, right? These are different, let's say, different eco-zones. So there are some coastal regions, some let's say hilly regions, some desert, some let's say agricultural land. So there are different lands, different kind of eco zones, and in every eco zone, different political system, different economic system, different society as well prevailed. Why? It was very much depending on that. So these are the certain examples that you could have used in order to prove that geography does have a greater impact over the development of history, and that's how you could have dealt with this answer. Okay. Let's move to the next question. Bring out the socio-economic effects of the introduction of railways in the different countries of the world. Now, this is a question that can be said from the world history. And now this question must be dealt in a very smart way, because this is something that you do not read exactly. Railway or the development of railway you study in Indian history, modern Indian history, but when it comes to development of railway, you never study it in America or let's say European countries or African countries. So definitely in every place the development of railway can be noticed, but you mostly study it in context of Indian history. But here it is asking bring out the socio-economic effects of the introduction of railways in different countries of the world. So when it comes to different countries, like you first would have been discussed about the introduction of railway. So in the intro you should have discussed about the introduction of railway itself, right? Okay, this is this is the beginning of railway, and after that you could have divided it into couple of stages, or like couple of areas, and that's how you would have discussed the answer, such as like the impact of this could be noticed first on, let's say, developed countries. So what impact railway is leaving on developed countries, and you could have taken the example of, let's say, United States. So railway played a very pivotal role in opening up the American West. So the moment America is getting into the western part, because initially when we will talk about America, only the eastern part, which is known as the 13 colonies, were colonized by them. Rest of the parts were colonized. Not, I won't say colonized, but I'll say expansion in the western side could be noticed only once America is getting independence. So after that, like, they have definitely started the project of developments, and the moment they are coming towards the western side, they had been doing various further developments. Railway is one of them. And how come this railway was helping them? So it was helping them in aiding the process of the industrialization, right, and then urbanization. So the way they have controlled the various resources, specifically mines and other things in the western side, so they wanted to develop it. So the industrialization and the urbanization was precisely based on that. At the same time, railway is playing very important role in the Civil War, which is one of the landmark events not only in the history of America, but even in the history of world. So we can find some role played by railway here as well. On the other hand, United Kingdom, the railway contributed for the Industrial Revolution, and by enabling the faster transportation of goods and people, leading to the urbanization and economic growth. Germany, railway is playing very important role for the unification of the German state. Apart from that, for the economic prosperity also it was helping him, Germany. Okay, when it comes to developing countries, I think yes, India may be the best example for it. India and China. When it comes to India and China, you don't need to have you don't need to think much about this. So railway is helping in multiple ways. So railway was helping, of course, in the economic prosperity. In fact, there was the central idea behind the establishment of the railway in India was basically the frequent movement of army and the commodities. They wanted to, colonial masters wanted to basically utilize the railway in order to secure smooth supply of the commodities to different parts of, or let's say to different markets. On the other hand, they just wanted to get the raw materials from different corners of India to the port cities, and that's how most of the railway networks were connecting the hinterlands to the port cities. So these were the major ideas behind this, and that's how it is helping. But then it is also quite helpful in Indian context in terms of developing the nationalism in India. You should understand that nationalism is all about connectivity, and any faster mean of connectivity could have, or any faster mean of communication could have connected the Indian people. So Indian society is getting united irrespective of the various diversities. So railway has played very important role, and that's why whenever we discuss about Indian nationalism, railway does play a very significant role. On the other hand, if it comes to China, the development of railway is crucial for the industrialization process and help in the internal migration, particularly from the rural areas to the urban areas. In African countries, railway were initially used for moving resources, specifically like gold, diamonds and other things, and you know that there were some good mines present over there. So they later became the critical for transporting agricultural products and the fostering internal trade. So these are certain ideas which were promoted by them. On the other hand, in Latin America, countries like Brazil, railway were essential for the export-oriented economy, particularly in the transportation of coffee and rubber. So that's how it's contributing in various, let's say, development of various economic and social aspects. That's the contribution of railway. There are, you could have included in your conclusion some general effects such as the social mobility that I have already discussed, the economic boost, the cultural exchanges, and then environmental impacts. So these are an inequality also, right? Inequality in some cases, railway facilitated colonial exploitation, deepening social and economic inequalities also. In Indian context, it is applicable. So you could have ended your answer with these kind of things. That's how you could have written this answer. Let's move to the next one. Okay, what are the main features of the Vedic society and religion? Do you think that some of the features are still prevailing in Indian society? So this question is asking about the main features of the Vedic society, right? And then it is also asking about the continuation of this. So this question is basically, this question should be dealt in two parts. One part where we are supposed to discuss about the important features of the religion and society. It's about the society and religion as well. Okay, this is the second aspect. So we need to discuss about the various aspects of society and religion, and then we need to also examine that whether they are continuing or not. So when it comes to main features of the Vedic society, so of course there are certain institutions got established by the Vedic society, such as we can talk about caste system, or let's say the Varna system, right? The patriarchal society, the rural settlements, the simple economy, or let's say rural economy, and then we can talk about the Aryan influence, the way Indian society is being influenced by this, and then at the end we can talk about this language and literature. So basically most of the systems what we follow in our society, even right now, they mostly got developed as per the information that we do have, like they mostly got developed in the Vedic period. वो ज़्यादातर करके वैदिक पीरियड में डेवलप होते हैं, और वैदिक पीरियड में डेवलपमेंट के बाद वो कंटिन्यू रहते हैं सोसाइटी में. ऑफ कोर्स देयर आर चेंजेस, ठीक है, एंड इन फैक्ट द चेंजेस यू मे फाइंड इन द डिग्रीज, not in the concept, such as Varna system. Varna system was probably evolving somewhere towards the end of early Vedic period or the later Vedic period, but then it continued. And it continued in what way? Maybe the degree has changed. Maybe earlier it was either being followed in a very strict way or maybe lighter way also, right? And right now the degree might have changed, but then this particular system continues. Patriarchy, the same way we can discuss about patriarchy, we can talk about the Gotra system, we can talk about the gender relationship. So these are certain important institutions which were established by the Vedic period in the society, and they even continued in the later period, right? When it comes to the religion, there are a couple of things that we have to understand here. Some religious institutions were also established by them, either in terms of God, in terms of rituals, sacrifices, and so on. And when you'll see the present day society, you'll find the continuation of that. Let us first understand what are the things like that you are supposed to write, such as polytheism is there. Or let's say along with polytheism, we can also discuss about one another term that's called as henotheism. What is henotheism? So in a particular place or in a particular situation, they have been giving due importance to one God, or let's say they have been giving due importance to one God. That's called as henotheism. So either you talk about polytheism or else you can talk about henotheism. Then you can also talk about the practices of rituals, and then we can talk about, let's say, sacrifices also. So rituals, sacrifices, then the way the oral traditions, basically the hymns or the mantras passed on from one generation to next generation through the oral tradition. These are some important features that could be noticed. Of course, here we can keep the concepts of God also. So they came up with certain ideas of God, and in fact, they're these concepts also continuing in the society. Again, I must say the degree may vary, but the continuation can be noticed in Indian society. Still, all these practices which are there, now we are probably not performing the yajnas or the rituals very frequently, but then we do it. Like on some regular intervals, we keep on doing that. The religious concept more or less remains same. So that's how we can talk about that every system, like whatsoever we have discussed, that ultimately continues in Indian society. And in fact, you should have just discuss about them, and you should have written that the degree is varying, but then continuation in this can be clearly noticed, right? Okay, moving to the next question. What were the major technological changes introduced during the Sultanate period? How did those technological changes influence the Indian society? Now, after a long time, we can find a question being asked from the medieval period. Normally, medieval is not being given due importance, but here they have been asking a question from the medieval also. So, in the means examination. So, there are of course certain changes. Normally what happens, it is believed that the medieval period is not known for some scientific developments. Mostly it is considered that it is a less progressive society, specifically with respect to the development of science and technology. But that does not mean that you do not find any as such progress here. Rather, I must say that there are certain progresses that can be definitely noticed. So let's see, like after writing an introduction, okay, this is the Sultanate period, and in this particular period there are various reasons because of what some scientific achievements or the developments can be noticed, such as in irrigation system we can find some new systems were coming, and the way the new seeds are coming, new irrigation technologies are coming. There we can talk about basically the development in agrahattas. So that a change can be noticed. In architecture and engineering also you find the change. A new sort of architectural pattern is coming, where they have been focusing on dome, arches and all these kind of things. The weaponry also got changed. Here also we find the gunpowder, the cannons, the firearms, these are being introduced. That's a quite a progressive change. Of course, it's a negative thing, but then in terms of science and technology, it's a progressive change, right? Then the introduction of paper. Now, paper was introduced in India. Then textile industry. In textile industries, you can find the spinning wheel, charkha, the hand loom. These are being introduced, and in fact, there are some important, let's say, important tools were also introduced, such as during this particular period we find the basically printing of the things. The block printing that has started, that is also a kind of contribution. Then it comes to minting and currency. There again we find the development in this line, right? So these are certain developments that could be noticed in the okay. Apart from that, there was some more which we must discuss, such as ceramic and the glass industry, leather and the paper industry, right? So paper industry I have already discussed. Leather industry is another thing which was introduced, and then tin coating was another thing which can be noticed. Okay, so these are some of the important developments. It's a factual question. You had to have the idea of these kind of developments, and if you had idea of these things, you could have written the answers. But this definitely conveys that you need to focus more on medieval also, right? You can't ignore it. Most of the students are ignoring it, but the way significance of medieval is increasing, not only in the pre, even in the mains examination, and it is actually a combination of two things: medieval plus science and technology. The historical development of science becomes very important over the period in history, like in history segment, so that you need to understand. Okay, let's move to the next question, right? Acha, there's one more part, sorry, I was just missing it. That was the influence on the Indian society. So when it comes to the influence on the Indian society, so it could be noticed in terms of agricultural prosperity. If the new irrigation system and the new kind of quality seeds are coming, in that case the development could be noticed here. The cultural synthesis can be noticed. Okay, the military advancement, of course, like India is getting more momentum and then more power, and that is the thing. In education and literature, the impact could be noticed. The economic impact, because the advances in the textile which further made India more important in terms of exporting these textile or clothes, that's how it's becoming important. Urbanization was becoming more and more consolidated. So that's how you can find the various impact over the Indian society. That's how you could have dealt the second part of this answer. Okay, moving to the next question. How did the colonial rule affect the tribal in India, and what was the tribal response to the colonial operation? So there are two aspects. The colonial operation, one aspect, and the second aspect is the responses. So basically you have to first write about that what were the operations, and in the second half you need to write about basically whatever the different movements or the revolts or uprisings done by the peasantry community. So we are going to start this answer with a sort of brief introduction of what the brief introduction of the tribals living in India since beginning, since the ancient times. The tribals could be noticed in India. The second part, after, and in fact here you need to write one more aspect, that as far as these tribals are concerned, they remain always untouched by the Indian rulers. The Indian rulers always believed that the tribal people do have right over the forest products. They prefer to remain isolated or live isolated, and that's how most of the Indian rulers, because in a couple of sources we do find the references of it, they have preferred to remain they have preferred to leave them as it is. उनको लगता था कि ये forest products के सहारे इनकी livelihood चलती है, तो they just preferred to continue it. That's one thing. And the second, as I told you, that they were never touching them. Okay. Now this you should write on the introduction, and then you'll be writing कि after the coming of the colonial rule, now several impacts can be noticed. Now one by one, in couple of points would have written it, such as land alienation. So their lands were also brought under this revenue system, right? So it was not left free, rather it was also brought under this revenue system. And I must tell you that till here, till the coming of the colonial rule, their land was not taxable. So any kind of revenue was not being collected from them, and that was a kind of major impact, or major, let's say, major negative impact of this can be noticed. Further, we can talk about the forest policies. The colonial people had realized the significance of the forest present in India, where mostly the tribals had been living. So since they were mostly dependent on trade, and that's how they always required the timber in order to make the ships. So initially they had been importing this timber from Myanmar, or let's say northeast. Then they realized that even in the Chhattisgarh, then MP, then Jharkhand, there are good forests, and in fact they could be used for getting timber. So that's how they focused on these areas, and they started changing the forest policies. They have passed various forest acts, so you could have referred those forest acts, and in those forest acts they have clearly, such as 1865, 1878, these are the years when they have been introducing these forest acts. And in these forest acts they have categorically declared that every resource which is there in the forest, these are the government belonging, or the government property, and that's how the natives of these regions do not have the right to touch it, or let's say to exploit it. That is what the main agenda of these acts, right? The last thing which is very important that we have to understand, no, not last, but definitely it's very important, and it's dealing with basically the expansion of the religion, right? So the way they wanted to promote Christianity into these areas, that was also something can be considered as very oppressive. The missionaries always believed that it is easy, or it is always easy to convert them into Christianity. They found them most vulnerable, and that's why they had been mostly approaching to them, and that's how they wanted to convert the tribals into Christianity, and to a greater extent they were successful in doing so also, though they were not doing the exploitation. But then still the people, the tribals, did not like this idea of the Christian missionaries, and they believed they should be allowed to follow their own practices, cultures, and whatsoever the cultic belief they had. That was their idea. So what happened? Like, that was something which was against them. Apart from that, like, we can talk about the commercialization of agriculture, the social dislocation, the labor exploitation. Sometimes they had been forced to convert themselves into labor. So these are certain reasons because of what, like, they were very much irritated. Once their land was brought under the revenue settlements, and that's how the entry of non-tribals was also made into these areas. The non-tribals, which were called as Dikus by them, was also a very problematic aspect for their life. Why? Because they never treated them properly, and they always they, in fact, most of the time they were not believing they are equal to them, or they were equal to human beings, and that's why they had been exploiting them. And these are certain areas where you can find mostly the tribal revolts took place, or the oppression took place, and as a result, like, you can find that several rebellions and the movements that took place. The movements that started from the late 18th century, and then the rebellions, the movements, the revolts started from late 18th century, and it continued till 20th century. So initially they mostly used to be what kind of movement? They mostly used to be the violent revolts, but then gradually they are converting themselves into political movement. So you could have referred some of the important revolts and uprising, such as you could have discuss about, let's say, the Bhil rebellion. Then you could have discussed about, let's say, the Santhal rebellion, then Munda rebellion, and in fact you could have given a kind of comparative study also, that how come they are changing their nature, and in fact gradually from purely the violent movement, violent revolt, they are converting themselves into a kind of political movement. That kind of transition can be noticed. So by giving references of couple of such rebellions, you could have answered this question, and then finally in the conclusion you would have written that after all these revolts, uprisings and movements, the government also became conscious for their questions, for their concerns, and then government on certain occasions came up with some positive results also, but they were so mere that they could not have changed their life altogether, and that's how you'll find the continuation of these people into either revolts or uprisings, or later on in the political movements. So that's all about the questions which are being asked. So I hope you could have got some idea about the way you are supposed to deal with the questions. So I'm wishing good luck to all of you for rest of the papers. So thank you very much. Thank you all.
Unacademy. Let's crack it.